Hey guys, welcome back. So today we'll be evaluating square roots. If you have the square root of 64, the square root of 64 is going to equal 8. The square root of 1 over 16. Your numerator, you're going to get the square root of 1 over the square root of 16. And your numerator, the square root of 1 equals 1. And then your denominator, the square root of 16 equals 4. So your final answer here is 1 over 4. Let's look at these examples here. Notice that the example that you have on the left, you do have a grouping symbol here for your parentheses. And then of course, notice on your right, you do not have a grouping symbol. So let's work here first. If you have the square root of 9 inside parentheses, this is going to equal 3. And then 3 squared, this is going to equal 9. So your final answer here in this example is going to be 9. Then remember on your right side, you do not have a grouping symbol. However, you have 9 squared under your radical symbol. So 9 squared is going to equal 81. And then the square root of 81 is going to equal 9. So your final answer on the right side is 9. And for this example here, remember if you have a number that is greater than or equal to 0, then the square root of that number raised to the second power is going to equal that number. So for the example that we just had, if we have the square root of 9 raised to the second power, then that means that my final answer will be 9 because my 2's here are going to cancel out. So if you have the same thing, let's say if you have a 3, the square root of 3 raised to the second power, your 2's are going to cancel out, your square root and the raised number 2. That means that your answer here is just going to be 3. So keep that property in mind that if you have a number greater than or equal to 0 and it is raised to the second power, so the square root is raised to the second power, then your final answer will be that number. Let's look at this example, the square root of 1.4 raised to the second power. Your final answer here is just going to be 1.4. What if you had the square root of 1 over 4? So your numerator, you're going to get the square root of 1 over the square root of 4. Your numerator, the square root of 1 is going to equal 1. And then the square root of 4 is going to equal 2. So your final answer here in this example is going to be 1 over 2. What about the square root of 5.1 raised to the second power? Your final answer here is just going to be 5.1. And if you decide to use a calculator for this example, you're going to do 5.1 and you're going to hit the square root of that. And this is the square root of 5.1. And then if you square that, you're going to also get 5.1 as your answer as well, which is what we have here. Let's look at this example, the square root of 4 squared. Inside your radical, 4 squared is going to be 16. And then the square root of 16 is going to equal 4. So your final answer here in this example is 4. And remember our other example, if you have a similar question like this, so let's say you had -4 inside parentheses raised to the second power, you're going to get -4 squared, this is going to be 16, and then the square root of 16 is going to be 4, so your final answer here is also 4. What if you have negative the square root of 121? The square root of 121 is going to equal 11. However, we do need to include our negative in our answer. So your final answer here is going to be -11. What about the square root of 49? The square root of 49 is going to equal 7. So your final answer here is 7. Negative square root of 225. The square root of 225 is going to equal 15. However, you do have a negative sign that you need to include. So your final answer here is going to be -15. Negative square root of 0.16. Your answer here is going to be -0.4 as your answer. Because remember, the square root of 0.16 is going to be 0.4. However, you do have a negative that you need to include, so that's why we included here in my answer. Let's look at this example. We have negative square root 16 over 81. In my numerator, we have the square root of 16. In my denominator, we have the square root of 81. The square root of 16 is 4. And then in your denominator, the square root of 81 is going to be 9. However, do not forget that you do have a negative sign on the outside that you need to include in your answer. So your final answer here is negative 4 over 9. What is the square root of 1? The square root of 1 is 1. What about you have negative square root of 9 over 49? So your numerator, you have the square root of 9. And then your denominator, you have the square root of 49. But don't forget, you do have negatives. So your numerator, the square root of 9 is going to be 3. In your denominator, the square root of 49 is going to be 7. And then we have our negative sign that we need to include in our answer. So your final answer here is negative 3 over 7. What about the square root of 0.09? Your final answer here is going to be 0.3 as your answer. And if you were to use a calculator for this, you are going to do 0.09 and take the square root of that, and that's going to give you 0.3. What about the square root of 0? The square root of 0 is going to equal 0, and this is your final answer here. What if you had the square root of x to the 6th power? So in this example, my exponent here is 6, but my square root is 2. So if I divide 6 divided by 2, and that's going to give us 3. So your final answer here is going to be x to the 3rd power, and this is your final answer. And don't forget as well is that x cubed raised to the 2nd power is going to give you x to the 6th power. Let's look at this example here. So the square root of 9, this is going to equal 3. And then here you have the square root of x to the 12th power. Remember, we can divide my 12 divided by 2. This is going to equal 6. So this means that you have x to the 6th power. So your final answer here is going to be 3x to the 6th power. And remember, if you have 3x to the 6th power all raised to the 2nd power, this is going to give you 9x to the 12th power, which is what we have here. What about the square root of x to the 8th power? Your final answer here is going to be x to the 4th power. Remember, if you divide 8 divided by 2, this is going to give you 4, which is our answer here. And also keep in mind that x to the 4th power, all raised to the 2nd power, is going to give us x to the 8th power. What about the square root of 16c to the 4th power? So the square root of 16, this is going to be 4. And then the square root of c4, this is going to be c to the 2nd power. Remember, if you divide 4 divided by 2, this is going to equal 2, which is what we received here. So your final answer here is 4c to the 2nd power. And also remember that 4c to the 2nd power, if you raise that all to the 2nd power, this is going to equal 16c to the 4th power. And what if you have the square root of 0 over 1? Your numerator, you're going to get the square root of 0 over the square root of 1. So the square root of 0 is just 0. And then the square root of 1 is just 1. So 0 divided by 1, this is just going to be 0. So your final answer here is 0. All right, so that is all for today. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye, guys.